Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our podcast, The Secret Lives of. Today we will start by discussing the history of tea and its inextricable links to colonialism. Then we will examine the impacts of tea production on both human beings and the environment. And finally, we will examine relationships with tea and our contemporary environment and some of the challenges the tea industry is facing. I'm Sophia Mehta, and I would love to welcome my two co-hosts today, Mary Drew Mason-Hill and Cara White. Today we will be sitting down together for some lovely cups of tea and to discuss the history of this amazing beverage. It's so lovely to sit with you both this afternoon. Do either of you drink tea? And if so, what kind do you prefer?
I love tea. Personally, I'm a big fan of herbal teas. Something with not too much caffeine in it is usually what I go for.
I like a chamomile or a sleepy time tea.
Oh yeah, sleepy time tea is good.
I love tea. I know my favorite kind of tea is Earl Grey, and something that I've been really passionate about lately is exploring the history of tea and finding out about this product that I try to drink every day, but don't really know much about. And one of the things I learned is that people have been drinking tea for over 3,000 years. It was originally used as an herbal medicine in China, and today people consume over 2 billion cups of tea on any given day, making it one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world.
But what exactly is tea? Like, I know it's from a plant and it comes from tea leaves, but where do those come from?
Yeah, so tea comes from the Camellia sinensis plant, which is a shrub or small tree originally from China. And in fact, there's fossil evidence of this plant in China dating back over 35 million years. These plants grow in warm climates with lots of rain and prefer acidic soil. The leaves from these plants are harvested and cured, and then they're cut, torn, and curled. Finally, the plants are packaged, often into bags, sachets, or tins, and then they're shipped around the world where consumers buy them, submerge them in hot water, and create the delectable beverage we know and love today. So you might be wondering, how did these plants move from being a Chinese herbal medicine to one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world? Tea first arrived in Europe in 1610. Carried to the continent by the Dutch East India Company, demand for this exotic beverage continued to rise over the course of the 17th century. However, its entrance into Europe has forever shaped the way the Western world perceives tea. For instance, when you think of tea, what's the first country that comes to mind?
England, obviously.
Exactly. Britain has become inextricably linked with tea consumption. For many, the thought of tea conjures images of the British tea table, covered with an array of delectable snacks and sweets. And while the tea table served as a critical catalyst for change in its own time, in order for tea to arrive in Britain, it first had to be produced in China, or, increasingly, in India, or present-day Sri Lanka. Under this new system, colonized workers were forced to work long days harvesting tea on plantations, deceptively described as gardens. Anadi Ramamurthy's article, Tea Advertising and Its Ideological Support for Vertical Control Over Production, goes so far as to describe the conditions of these plantations as akin to slavery. Moving a couple hundred years into the future, when we look at the contemporary tea industry, we can certainly still see these links to colonialism. When you buy something, how often do you actually consider the labor conditions under which it was produced?
On a good day, I try and think about it, but less often than I would like to admit.
I try to think about the labor conditions, but sometimes if you're in a rush and you're just at this grocery store trying to buy some things, you don't really have time to consider the labor conditions under which.
It's hard when you're thinking about stuff that you need for your daily life.
Yeah.
I don't really think about it as much as if it's just something I want.
Mm-hmm.
I try and be more practical about it.
Yeah. And it's hard, there's so little transparency. It's hard to even make a responsible decision.
Yeah.
And I think today, all we can really do is our best to think about the labor that goes into creating these products. But the reality is, most consumers pick products without considering the labor that goes into producing them. However, exploited labor and inhumane practices are far from a thing of the past. Today, the majority of tea is still produced in China, India, and Sri Lanka, demonstrating a clear link to the colonial origins of the product. Moreover, today people harvesting tea plants often work 11-hour days and are compensated a measly $1 to $1.50 for their labor. Long days of work under inhumane conditions lead to a plethora of health problems ranging from back problems to hearing loss. In fact, a 2022 study examined the long-term health consequences of working in a tea production factory in India. The study found that working in this setting resulted in hearing loss rates of 28.3%. And in the cutting, tearing, curling room, this rate increased to 47.6%.
Jeez.
In examining the factory, the researchers did not find any forms of hearing protection. Not only that, but with workers living in housing within the garden itself, there is no escape from these dangerous sound levels. In an era when producing things cheaply and quickly has been prioritized, old machinery, a lack of soundproofing infrastructure, and industry standards which are not enforced have resulted in dangerous working conditions. So we've discussed a couple of the ways in which contemporary tea production is harmful to human workers. I also want to briefly touch on the environmental impacts of this commodity. When tea crops are planted, natural habitats are destroyed and replaced with monocultures, and animals become endangered as their once diverse habitats become monotonous. Not only that, but tea cultivation has been linked to soil erosion, and many of the pesticides have detrimental impacts on natural ecologies. At the beginning of this episode, I asked you about your own tea drinking habits. Now let's examine those questions more broadly. Today, 3 billion people drink tea globally, and over 90% of tea sold in the Western world is black tea. Not only that, but those teas primarily come from India, China, and Sri Lanka. What do you two make of that?
It's almost like nothing's changed since colonial times.
Yeah, it seems so obvious. The result of colonialism is just right in our face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was amazing to me researching this and the history of tea to learn that these plantations are so clearly linked to European colonization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important, even as we examine the problematic history of tea, to also acknowledge that the beverage continues to have cultural significance for people around the world. In China, tea is the national beverage and considered a sign of morality, refinement, and culture. Tea is shared between people as a sign of respect. Additionally, in Britain, tea continues to be a huge part of the national culture, with many people drinking 1 or more cups a day. Moreover, Britain retains the tradition of afternoon tea, a light meal between lunch and dinner, which has become a ritual for special occasions. And although tea was originally brought to India by British colonizers, chai has become a significant cultural beverage, and a hot cup of this spiced tea is often prepared whenever a guest comes to visit. Morocco, too, cherishes tea, often drinking a mixture of sweetened mint and gunpowder tea. For people in Morocco, sharing tea is a way to demonstrate hospitality, and tea is served typically whenever a guest comes to visit. So, as we finish up our own gathering around a warm cup of tea, I encourage you to think not only about the worker exploitation and environmental destruction this beverage has wrought, but also about what this beverage means to you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you again soon for a lovely meal hosted by Cara.